Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Oshin. I'm a lecturer in philosophy, and in this session today, I'm joined by a colleague called Dom, who'll be answering any questions via the text chat Q&A function. And I'm also joined happily by two students who you'll be hearing more from shortly, Eve and Jack. So today you'll be hearing from me mostly, and then in the middle of my talk, you'll be hearing from two current students, Eve and Jack. So the talk is about philosophy, so hopefully you're in the right room. And as I said, my name is Oshin. I've written my name on the board there on the screen, because I know it's an unusual name. It's Irish, in case you're wondering. I also realised I don't have a very Irish lilt. My dad worked in the airport industry, so I moved around quite a lot when I was a youngster and lived outside of Ireland, hence this international-ish type accent you get from those types of schools. But you can simply call me Oshin. If you ever want to remember it, just think of like Mr. Sheen, or Michael Sheen, like the actor, and just think of that sound, Oshin. So welcome. So I'm going to begin the talk this evening by talking about philosophy in general. I don't know if any of you have had experience in philosophy. Some of you might be for the first time considering to study it. So I'll be talking about philosophy generally, and then I'll be speaking specifically about philosophy at Dundee, what makes it distinctive from other programs in Scotland, as well as actually the UK. So let's start with just a philosophy question. Why study philosophy? Well, you can see here, first of all, an image, hopefully, which plays on some of the contemporary worries, concerns and anxieties that we have, which is what is the role of truth in modern day societies, especially in the wake of things like, the storming of the Capitol in the United States of America in January, and people claiming that there wasn't a fair election. And many other kinds of theories, especially in the age of COVID, such as COVID is a scam, or it's fake, or is created by government, which are raising questions about what is truth, not what is a specific truth, but what is truth in general. How do you differentiate truth from simply opinion, which is a very old question. In fact, it goes back to at least the ancient Greek philosophers who are asking that very question themselves. How do you differentiate someone's simply opinion from a reasoned form of argument that could lead us to some form of truth? So that's one of the big questions in philosophy. And so one way of thinking about philosophy is that it asks very big questions, such as not what is like a given truth. What is, for example, 2 + 2 = 4, or who won the presidency in the United States of America in 2021, but the general question of what is truth in general. What marks out all of these things as truths, right? What makes a truth in politics and a truth in mathematics the same? Or how can we at least connect them? So that's a really big question. So that's one of the hallmarks of philosophy. It asks big questions. And the kinds of questions it asks tend to be questions that are sometimes assumptions in other disciplines, that is, other areas of knowledge that you can study at university, right? So no matter if you're studying literature or if you're studying law or physics, there are some assumptions going to be made about what is a text or what is energy, and those assumptions will guide the inquiry, right? And those disciplines don't often take time, because they've got so much else to do, to inquire into those basic assumptions of what is a text or what is energy, right? And that's one of the kind of basic things that philosophy does. It often looks at these starting type questions. And the other thing which is distinctive about philosophy is that we study thinkers which span over several thousands of years. So this is not the only discipline to do this, of course. If you study literature, for example, you're very likely to study figures who've written over several thousands of years. But not all disciplines do this, right? If you look at, for example, say the sciences, they would tend to read authors in the last century or so, right? Because the idea is that old science, if it's not true or useful, is no longer studied, right? But philosophy has an unusual relationship to its own history, where we still read, right, people who wrote several thousands of years ago. We, of course, read contemporary philosophers, but we also still read the ancient Greeks, for example. So what do you do practically if you study philosophy? Well, one way of thinking about it, right, is that we think critically about major problems that haven't been solved yet and about new emerging problems. Right? So one way of thinking about philosophy, it has so-called perennial philosophical problems, right? Perennial meaning that they're constant questions in different epochs and different historical ages, right? People keep asking them, such as the question of truth that I began today's talk with, right? The ancient Greeks asked that question, what is truth in general? And we're asking this, right? More so than ever nowadays, you could argue, right? In light of, say, certain kinds of conspiracy theories. As well as these old questions, which keep repeating themselves from one age to another, we also have new questions, right? New emerging problems. And take one of the most defining probably of the contemporary era, climate change, right? And extinction issues, right? This is not a question that the ancient Greeks really posed because they didn't have the relationship to planet Earth that we humans now have due to our technology, due to the number of human beings that are on planet Earth, and etc. So on one hand, philosophy deals with these perennial, very old questions that has always bugged people, as it were, and it deals with new emerging problems where we're starting to think about how do we even tackle this as an issue. You also tend to think about problems in very different kind of ways. So in artistic ways, in ethical ways, and in political ways, for example. And what these all share, the ethical, the political, and the artistic, is that they are so-called normative enterprises. Normative in contrast to descriptive. And what that means, the term normative, it means it's value laden, right? So it's normally about questions about the way the world ought to be or should be, rather than the way the world is, right? So philosophy is interested in, to a certain extent, the question of the way the world is and has been. But it's also deeply interested in the question of the way the world ought to be, right? So for example, if you studied politics at university, like your degree, you'd be not only, but to a great degree, focused on questions of political science, which means the way the world is, right? The way, so you look at the current nation state, you would look at how to quantify poll results, etc. But in political philosophy, by contrast, rather than the way we look at the world as it is now, we think of the way the world should be, right? How it could be reorganized, right? That's one of the big things of philosophy. It's normative in orientation. And the other thing which you regularly do is also think about texts as well as arguments critically, which means you think about them from a point of view of evaluating them, right? What are the strengths and weaknesses of a given text, of a given argument presented by that text, right? So rather than accept everything equally at face value, a lot of philosophy is about, well, there's good reasons to believe that, but there's good reasons to believe that, right? Because often in philosophy, it's not simply a question of there's one right answer and then everything else is wrong. Often it's, well, there are two reasonable claims here, and how do we adjudicate them, right? How do we differentiate them? Or at least two. Hark back to my beginning. One of the things we do in philosophy is differentiate truth from opinion. And the ancient Greek word for opinion is doxa. If you're unfamiliar with that word, you might be more familiar with another word, the English word orthodox, which comes from, its root is in doxa, in the ancient Greek word doxa. So an orthodox stance is something that is rooted in conventional opinion, right? Things as they've been for a while. And philosophy often isn't interested in the orthodox, it's interested in what it claims to be the search for truth, right? So it doesn't accept valid opinion as it is now, unless it's convinced by being given good reasons, right? But often philosophy says, well, the reasons you've given are not good enough, right? Whether they be reasons given by the church as an institution, which philosophy traditionally, but not always, has said are not very compelling, or whether it be the sciences nowadays, which also sometimes issues proclaimants that philosophy says need more nuance or differentiation or subtlety, for example. And that part of this means that in philosophy you often challenge yourself. Right? Not simply challenging other people, but challenging yourself. And you do this because you come to university, right, with your own beliefs, right? And of course, those beliefs come from your family in part, from your schooling in part, from any religious background you might have had in part, from your friends in part, and from your own vision, right? And then what you're confronted with is a set of other claims, and you've got to work out, well, where do I stand on this issue, right? Where do I stand on this issue? That's a really big, important part of philosophy. And I say this because my wife teaches French at the University of Glasgow, And that's not something you often see, for example, in French studies, right? In French studies, you learn all sorts of very fascinating things, French history, French culture, the French language, but you're not often put in the position of going, well, where do you stand on this issue, right? I say a conjugation. You're not asked your opinion, your stance on what you think of a given conjugation in the French verb. You're just simply told, this is it, and learn it well. So this is a big part of philosophy, is working out where you stand on certain issues. And this means that you develop a series of skills, right, such as you can see them on the screen here: logical reasoning, conceptual clarity, communicating articulately, ability to formulate and address problems creatively, which are valuable, right? Now, there is a fact I know. I'm not a huge fan of telling this fact, because it's not really why I study philosophy, and I don't think it's probably why many people study philosophy, if I'm very honest. But there are companies out there, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, who value these kinds of skills. And if you look at like who they hire after their degrees, they hire a large amount of philosophy graduates. And that might seem surprising in one sense, right? Because people think of, well, if you take a philosophy degree, what do you do, right? There's no philosophy factory. What do you do? So if you go down the financial path, there is in fact a viable path, a lucrative one for that matter. But of course, in philosophy, we ask ourselves questions like, well, what is the role of a company like PricewaterhouseCoopers? What is the role of capitalism in modern day society, right? So philosophy also sometimes would critique that very process of hiring. But it is there, right? And it is important to know that we obviously need to make a living in life as well. And you do get skills which are valuable to others, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers. At this point, if this was on campus, as we used to do these types of talks, I'd show a quick clip from The Good Place, which is a television show, which some of you might know, but if not, I recommend it. It is a show where one of the main protagonists is a philosophy lecturer, and it's written with and in consultation with some academic philosophers. So often deals with philosophical issues of one sort or another. It's a comedy though, so what's very unusual about it is that it's generally a funny television program which, you know, incorporates philosophy, which is really rare, right? Often, yeah, philosophy and not much comedy, or you have a lot of comedy but not much explicit philosophy. But here's explicit philosophy and lots of comedy. So irrespective of what you do in your life, I recommend this television show. It's a good one. And you get a better sense again of what philosophy is from just watching it. Now I'm going to start honing in on philosophy at Dundee specifically, right? Rather than philosophy in the abstract, which is what I've been doing so far. So you might be able to identify these two photographs perhaps, or the people in them. And this is indicative of the kind of philosophy that we do at Dundee. So on the left, you've got a photograph there of Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, two so-called French existentialists. And on the right, you've got Friedrich Nietzsche. And the reason why we have these photographs is because at Dundee, we do something which you cannot do at any other Scottish university. You can do it in England, but not in any other Scottish university. And that is, we specialise in what is called Continental Philosophy. Now, it's not a great name. We didn't invent it, Continental Philosophy. What it refers to is the continent of Europe, right? So it was coined by some philosophers in England at the beginning of the 20th century to start naming the philosophy which was really occurring mostly in France and Germany. And they felt it was different enough from their own to label it something else. And they called it Continental Philosophy. So we could just translate it as European philosophy, mainland European philosophy. So above all, French and German thinkers, such as the people who are in the photographs on the screen right now, who hail from France and Germany. So that's one of the distinctive things. Now, the other tradition of philosophy in the 20th and 21st century is called Analytic Philosophy. And up on your screen now, I don't know if you're familiar with any of these names. Some of them are in popular culture, such as Nietzsche, who I've already mentioned, to a small extent Kierkegaard as well in popular culture. And some are pretty obscure. You might not have heard of them if you haven't studied philosophy at university. This is also not an exhaustive list. There are many more than 3 analytic philosophers. There are thousands of them. And of note, of famous ones, there are dozens. But it just gives you a sense of the kind of names, if you've heard of any names. Now, there's no uncontroversial, non-polemical way to differentiate these two different traditions, that is, Continental from Analytic, right? There are different things which some people say which you can differentiate them. And I'll tell you some of them, right? But they're all contentious. Be mindful of that. So some of the things that are sometimes said about Continental philosophy is that it's more interested in the social sciences and the arts than Analytic philosophy. And that Analytic philosophy, by contrast, is more interested in the natural sciences. Right? So Continental philosophies have often been interested in the arts, whether it be literature or cinema, etc. Also in history and sociology, while Analytic philosophy has tended to be more interested in things like physics. Right? The other thing that is often said is that Continental philosophy is very interested in the history of philosophy and how we think about problems differently from, say, the ancient Greeks, while Analytic philosophers often less rely on contrasting their stance with the ancients, right? Partly because of their interest in the natural sciences. I remember I said at the beginning how the natural sciences tend not to be too interested in scientists from many centuries ago, right? But as I said, there's no controversial answer I can give you to differentiate these two traditions, but it gives you a slight sense of the kinds of things that people say. So we are interested in Continental philosophy, right? Now, another thing that I tend not to do too much, but I will do it this one rare occasion, is sort of harp on about rankings, right? So university rankings is a controversial endeavor in itself, and you should know that as any applicant. If you don't, be aware that it is, right? Because different metrics are used, etc. But I understand students, for sometimes very reasonable grounds, want to know these kinds of things. And so I should say that our metrics are quite good, actually. So take the Guardian's ranking of philosophy specifically. So this is a ranking of philosophy. We are the second in Scotland after only St Andrews, which is an analytic school. So they do the other kind of philosophy, the one which is more interested in natural sciences than us, who are more interested in Continental philosophy, and so more interested in culture, the arts and the social sciences. And it means we also beat a lot of other prestigious universities, right, such as the LSE, York University, Sheffield, Essex, Holloway, Essex, amongst others. So in terms of rankings, that is very good. And one of the reasons why that's so good is because our students give feedback at the end of their degrees, and we get very good feedback, which is the reason why we have these high scores. And you'll hear some current students very shortly. I'm mindful of the time, actually, I've got to speed up slightly. So some other things, we teach in small groups. That's distinctive in Dundee. I say this because I taught at the University of Toronto in Canada, which is a fascinating place, but it is very different from the University of Dundee. Its staff numbered in 60, a faculty of 60 staff members, and its PhD students were in the hundreds. So it was gigantic. It's one of the biggest universities in the world. And it's very prestigious, but it meant that I got to know no one's name, right? It's not very personal experience because there are so many staff. There are, thousands upon thousands of just philosophy students. So you don't get to know anyone. So it's quite impersonal. And it's a good thing to think about when you go to university. It's something that people not often think about, but is the size, right? Will it be a place where the staff know your name, right? For some people that's important, others it's not. But if that is important to you, I'd say this is a good place, right? We tend to get high scores when it comes to students giving us feedback, right, in the National Student Survey. So things about like enthusiasm and staff being available, right, out of hours when you say, could I talk to you about this issue outside of the lecture? We get good scores for that kind of thing. And another thing about Dundee, which is quite good, is that you can combine your philosophy degree with another subject, right, such as English or film or politics, which are all very popular choices. And also something which is very distinctive of Dundee is that there's an art school that University of Dundee has. It's called DJ CAD. So practicing artists, people want to become painters and sculptors and performance artists, etc. They have a degree option where they can study philosophy and art, like actually doing art, actually making things. And so they're in their classroom with you guys, right? So it means that you've got people in the classroom who study, say, English literature or say study politics, but also people who study photography and painting and performance studies, etc., and are making things. And that leads to a kind of distinct type of conversation sometimes, which I think is really rare in philosophy classrooms, because I've taught in Canada, Australia and South Africa, and nowhere have I had I've belonged to an institution which has an art school like this, where you have these types of students. So it's very distinctive of Dundee, and I think it's one of the best things about being a student at Dundee myself. Here's a picture of my fellow colleagues. The person on the bottom left arm is the one who will be answering any questions in the live chat, because I'm the one who's speaking. So I can put myself in this picture here. We're an international bunch, mostly from, well, elsewhere than the UK. So we've got people from Italy, people from Germany, people from Australia. So it's international staff. Now, at this point, I would normally read the quotes here from past students, but I'm actually going to leave that because I'm being a bit slow today and I'm mindful of the time. And I think rather than read these quotes out, I'm going to transfer you to two of our live students, as students who are with us right now. They're current students of the University of Dundee, and I'll do them consecutively. So first of all, you'll have Eve, and we'll hear for Eve for a few minutes, and then we'll hear from Jack, so not at the same time, one after the other. And if you've got any questions for them, you are welcome to ask any questions, but we'll take those questions right at the end. So you can ask them any questions if you want to ask them a question rather than me, but we'll do that question right at the end and we can get any response from them. So at this point, give me a second while I do the fiddly bit of transferring the camera to that student. So I'm going to put on Eve now in a second. As I said, the fiddly thing. That's strange. Eve, do you have your camera on? Because it says your camera is off, so I'm getting a kind of great box. Okay, yes, okay. Okay, great, yeah, fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to send. No worries. Here we go. So Eve, you're now live. I'm going to shut up now. Floor is yours.
Grand. So as you've heard, my name's Eve. I'm about to go into my 4th year of uni at Dundee studying philosophy with French. So I first came to Dundee for an open day in 2016. I'd never been before, but I instantly fell in love with the city and the campus. Compared to the other unis that I kind of seen at open days and such, I kind of felt like Dundee provided something really special with such a kind of distinct university campus, feeling quite enclosed and safe, but also closely surrounded with, you know, the excitement of the city. So I found it was great to get that on-campus university experience, while also just having that freedom to like nip to the city to grab breakfast in between class, or stop by the shopping centre on your way home from school or uni, which I guess you don't really get, I found, with other universities. I liked that the whole campus was together, whereas in other places I found it was quite separate, and I thought that maybe wasn't for me. A fun fact about me is that I'm here representing the philosophy department at Dundee currently, but I didn't actually apply for philosophy originally. When I started in 2017, I was a politics with French student. So I studied politics, French and history modules for 2 years until I had to make up extra credit 1 year. So I took a chance on a philosophy module, which I ended up loving. I'd never studied RE or philosophy past S2 in high school, but by 3rd year I'd changed my degree pathway to philosophy with French, and I never looked back, really. It took studying that one philosophy module to realise that, for me personally, something was almost missing with my studies, and I'm grateful that the philosophy department and the humanities department at Dundee provide the opportunity to experiment with your studies a bit and take advantage of the first 2 years of your uni to try different subjects and kind of really discover what you want your education to be for you. I never once felt pigeonholed into studying just politics and French because I'd applied for it. You know, Dundee encouraged me to try new things and step out of my comfort zone and study modules I would probably never have done before, which ended up shaping my, my current degree pathway. And it's something I definitely encourage every applicant to do during their university experience. Also, just try different things while you can, because you might, you never know where you might end up. To make this a little bit more interesting, not that philosophy is not interesting, but I thought I'd talk a little bit more about my university life outside of the classroom. So from first year until now, I've been in society for 4 years. I've been part of the theatre society at the uni. It's called Lip Theatre. And it's allowed me over the 4 years to kind of meet so many new people, including my boyfriend actually, act in shows, participate backstage. I joined the committee, and I've actually had experience on that part of the committee as a secretary and then as a vice president. I've attended university social events and linked with other committees and societies. The one that sticks in my memory most is probably Big Band's Great Gatsby night that they do every year before COVID. Hopefully it'll come back soon. It was always just such a great time. And I've even taken a show to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe for 2 weeks. So there's so much that you can do. Even that's just my one experience of my one society, but I'm sure every other society has an equal fun journey that you can do with that as well. I've also worked for DUSA, the student union, for the last 3 years. I started at bartending, and most recently I've changed over into the retail department. So it allows you to kind of earn money in a flexible way, which cater to your needs as a student. You can kind of choose what days you work that fits in with your studies, and they won't let you work too much without talking to your advisor of studies. So if you're looking for employment, I found that DUSA was a great flexible way that, your job will know that you're a student, and they'll kind of make way for that. So that worked for me. But also I got to, make friends with other students who I probably would never have met because they weren't even in my year or on my course. And as I said, my experience is only one path. There's so many possibilities here at Dundee. So there's always an opportunity, I find, to kind of make your studies unique to you and your experience unique to you. Because I've got so many friends who've got so many different experiences, and there's never just one right way to do uni. So I think Dundee's really got a good opportunity to kind of try different new things and do a lot with what you want for your education. So to kind of conclude and circle back to philosophy, I've really loved my university experience so far, and I cannot wait to start my 4th year. I used to kind of feel like sort of an imposter, a kind of imposter syndrome in class, and almost like I maybe didn't belong and didn't really feel like I knew as much as my classmates, and maybe didn't want to speak up as much. But since changing to philosophy, I definitely feel this less often. It always creeps in there sometimes, but I'm able to kind of think, no, like I do have an opinion and it is valid. So the department of the uni has definitely given me kind of the freedom to like think critically and creatively and feel like my voice and opinion matters. And I've had so many opportunities for, meaningful discussion with my classmates and lecturers without having to feel like that imposter. And oh no, like I feel like it's a really kind of equal play field for everyone, which I really enjoyed. I think especially in the philosophy department, it's a great blend of kind of all sorts of areas of academic study. So even just within the School of Philosophy, I feel like you're never just studying one specific thing. It's never just one niche. It's always so many different niches, and you can kind of choose that for yourself when you get more into kind of 3rd and 4th year. And that's probably what I've enjoyed the most about it. So thanks for listening. I hope this has been helpful to you. And as Oisin said, any questions, me or my other student will answer hopefully at the end. Thanks.
Fab. Thanks so much, Eve. I learned a lot about you there as well, which I didn't know. So congratulations on those various achievements. Now we can listen to Jack. Jack, you've also got your camera off. So if you want to put your camera on, so fantastic. And then I'm going to transfer you over. And now you're live, Jack. And again, your floor is yours.
Okay, hopefully the mic's on. My name's Jack, and I'm, like Eve, just about to go into my 4th year. I had a bit of a different journey into philosophy at Dundee. I came from an HNC in social sciences at Dundee College, and came straight into 2nd year from that. I've always sort of had a great interest in philosophical questions. I think I got to study advanced higher RE in high school, but then wavered with that and went into full-time work and so on. But one of the reasons I decided to embark in studying philosophy is personal events in my life. Decided to quit my full-time job and decided to come and study philosophy, which is an aspect I think is important to reflect on, and I think opens up more throughout studying philosophy, is why you want to study philosophy in the first place. And I think that it gets to like the transformative aspect of philosophy. There's a real genuine essential transformative aspect to engaging in reflective contemplation in philosophy. And I think that as I actually made the distinction between analytic philosophy and continental philosophy, I think the variety of questions and the way of question in continental philosophy is really deeply ingrained in that tradition that comes from Plato and the Greeks, and has moved forward through time. And so I think the expansiveness of the reading list, for example, and the thinkers and the questions that you deal with is, I think that as Oisin said, Dundee's the only unique place in Scotland that deals with this way of thinking. And I think I would not have been opened up even further in my own personal questioning if I hadn't been introduced to certain thinkers in this tradition, such as, say, Martin Heidegger, for example, in the sort of coming out of the German idealism. And I don't think there's a certain existentialist dimension to other forms of philosophy that you may study elsewhere in Scotland. But also the teaching in the philosophy department in Dundee is second to none. As Arsene also mentioned, it's a very tight knit community, very personal. So there's a lot of relationships with your fellow students, as well as the lecturers themselves, which I think bleeds into itself. And again, there's that transformative aspect. But yeah, I think philosophy at Dundee should be a top consideration precisely because of its unique approach to philosophy itself in this continental tradition, but also just the variety of the expertise from the teaching staff. I think it's second to none.
Well, thanks a lot, Jack, for those words. We don't script these, by the way. The students can just say whatever they want, and it's lovely to hear those things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just discuss in a bit more detail. Let me just go back to my PowerPoint. Sorry. Something about the philosophy program at Dundee, and then, as I said, you can ask any questions either of me as a lecturer or the two students you've heard from, Eve and Jack. And just before I begin, by the way, just to build on Jack's point, there's a philosopher and theologian called Henry Newman, who founded a university actually in Ireland called University College Dublin, and he wrote a book about it. And he said that, you know, what he thought was the core of university wasn't its degrees or certificates or what have you, or its exams, but the conversations that happen between people, right? And I think that's something you got both from Jack's talk actually and from Eve's talk, is the talks that happen not only between student and staff, but student to student, right? And that collegial atmosphere being so important. So I really sort of want to highlight that. Right, so back to philosophy at Dundee. So another thing that is important for you to know as an applicant is the research interests of the faculty that you're applying to. And the reason why that is important, if you don't already know this, is that in many philosophy degrees, if you're talking about Scotland, the first and second year, and if you're talking about England, just the first year, tend to be similar-ish, right? So there are some canonical figures and thinkers that philosophy will often look at, such as Plato, such as Descartes, such as Kant, if you've heard of these names. But what happens towards the end of the degree, and so in Scotland that's the third and fourth year, and in England that's the third year, is that you tend to do modules that are based upon the research of the faculty, of the staff that you're at, right? So it's good to know this because every university will be different, right? This is where it starts to, you know, be quite different from one another. So I thought I'd just say something briefly about the research interests of us, basically the staff at Dundee. You can see here on the screen a picture of some of our books. That's not all our books, so basically I can't fit them onto the page, but just a representative list of some of our books. I appreciate you can't see the titles and things like that in any great depth, but just give you a few images, and I'm going to speak to you about the themes broadly that we as staff hold and are interested in, research themes. So it's good to know that our research goes into our teaching, right, especially in third and fourth year, and that teaching with you guys, with students, also shapes our research, right? I know from my own experience, and I know all my colleagues would say the same thing, that the books you write are partly impacted by our teaching, right, in third and fourth year, and what you guys say. So I didn't have a photograph of myself earlier, but here's a photograph of myself with one of my own books. That's the day it arrived at my own home then, so I'm a very happy chap, as you can see from the photograph. So themes. So broadly speaking, I would say that there are three major interdisciplinary research interests, right? Interdisciplinary meaning it crosses disciplines. So the three are aesthetics, philosophy of technology, and philosophy and the life sciences. So I would say these are not the only themes, but I think these are probably three of the strongest themes that the Philosophy Dundee program has. So aesthetics is the study of art, whether it be visual art or whether it be literature and poetry. So art in general. The second is philosophy of technology, which, as the name sounds, as you know what its interest is in, technology. And this is back to one of the first things I mentioned at today's talk, which is that philosophy, on the one hand, has this perennial set of questions, and it has actually been interested in technology from the get-go, but perhaps for obvious reasons, technology has become more and more at the forefront of philosophy's concerns with the advent of the internet, with this device, right? Think of this little smartphone and how it shapes our lives, whether it be, how you communicate with others, back to that question of conversations, whether it be political consequences from this, right? Think about how it harvests information from you and how that information is sold to companies nowadays, etc. Right? So it has modern technology has huge ramifications in all areas of philosophy, and so this is something which is a really important question nowadays. And the third major interdisciplinary theme is philosophy in the life sciences, right? And these are the life sciences refer to things like biology, right? So it's questions about, for example, climate change, questions about, say, how we treat non-human animals, questions, for example, about COVID, right? And about how we regulate ourselves as a society in light of COVID, right? Or what we do in light of the extinction which is currently happening to a number of species and which is accelerating, right? So those types of questions, which again goes back to this question of perennial questions. Philosophy has always been interested in the question of how you define life. That's one of the oldest questions, which still is very difficult to answer. Scientists can't give you an answer at the moment because every definition they've given so far of life includes things they don't want to include, such as viruses. So interestingly, there's a whole area of the university called life sciences, which has not yet got a rigorous definition of life, if you could believe it. And it's a contemporary question, right? Because so much about nowadays is about extinction and how we live with that and what we do with that. To give you just a breakdown of your degree structure now, right? You can do single honours or joint honours. Joint means you do it with another subject, such as English or politics or film, are probably some of the most popular ones. It consists of lectures, seminars and tutorials. I'd say that's pretty consistent across the UK. What is not very common is that we don't use exams. So all our evaluation is essays, tutorial work, and optional art projects. So two things which are not common here. One is we don't use exams, even in first year, right? So it's quite common at universities to have exams. We in Dundee don't really value exams that highly for the reason that we don't think philosophy is greatly about how much you can say in 2 or 3 hours, right? It's much better to say, have several weeks, come back to me, write something about where you really stand on this issue. It's best to do that. And the second thing, which is not very common, is that not all our modules, but some of our modules allow you, instead of doing a traditional essays response, to create something, right? So I spoke earlier about how there's a degree pathway called Art and Philosophy, where you do that in your entire degree. But there's also this new emerging thing we're doing at Dundee, where even if you're doing a philosophy degree just on its own, you can, in some modules, do a creative art project, right, instead of simply an essay, which is quite exciting, right? It allows you to explore different media and different ways of responding to questions. To give you a sense of a year by year breakdown of things you might do, in year one, you've got the canonical courses where you do the famous philosopher, such as Plato and the Good Life, so the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, Descartes, Thought and Reality, which looks at the questions of the mind above all, and how we differentiate the mind from the body. In year two, you have modules which are more about movements or different areas of philosophy, such as aesthetics, which remember is about the study of art, broadly speaking, and existentialism, which is a philosophical movement associated with people like Sartre and Beauvoir, pictures of which I showed you earlier. And then in options, in years 3 and 4, you have options, right? So this is the thing I said earlier about how each university you go to will be a bit different especially in their third and fourth year from Scotland, because it will reflect the research interests of staff. So this is when you get to choose and have a lot more choice. And then year 4, you do your dissertation. It's also important to note that you can spend some time abroad in your third or fourth year. Probably the most popular place for philosophy students I've noted is a university in Australia called the ANU, which I myself have spent some time as a postdoctoral fellow, but it's very popular with students. I imagine not only because it's a very good university, which it is, but also because it's Australia, and so that has its own charms and attraction. So that's also possible to do. To give you not an exhaustive list, because it changes, but just a list which gives you an indication of the kind of things you might do in third, fourth year, I'm going to give you a list of what our current third and fourth year modules are. Well, the ones we just taught over the last academic year. They keep changing, right? So by the time you come to your third and fourth year, they might obviously not be the same. Very likely, in fact, not to be the same. It'll give you a sense of the kind of things you can do. So you've got understanding media, the philosophical and cultural impacts of technology. That goes back to the theme I spoke earlier about the role of technology shaping contemporary life, right? Whether it be politics or whether it be the time you go to sleep, or if you can get to sleep. We've got feminist philosophies and queer theories, right? So this is about modern day debates about gender and trans studies, for example, and LGBTQ issues. Concepts of critique, right? So this is a little bit more politically inclined, as well as about reasoning, which is ways of thinking about critiquing, so ways of evaluating arguments, which are not simply dismissing them. And there's a long history of philosophy about being critical, including being critical of being critical, how we can be self-reflexive, right, about that issue. Nature's cultures, which is about things like climate change and extinction studies and non-human animals and their status, right? So it's about that very old distinction between nature and culture, of the very distinction of which we evaluate and think about in philosophy, right? Because it's no longer so easy to demarcate those two things, right? Because they bleed into one another, as we're seeing through mass extinction events. We've also got German idealism, which if you haven't studied philosophy, you've probably never heard of, but there are famous epochs in the history of philosophy, and one of the most famous of all time is German idealism, associated with a number of philosophers who are really interested in the role of concepts in the mind in the construction of reality, right? In how we experience reality. And it still influences philosophy to this very day. It's one of the most influential periods of philosophy, whether people reject it or accept it, right? It's just influential. Fear, courage, and anxiety in philosophy and film, right? So this shows you, again, an interest in aesthetics, right? Because it's philosophy and film, where you actually look at films in the module as practical things to look at, but you discuss, rather than, you say, discussing the director's work per se, which you might do, for example, in film studies, rather we take a number of concepts, as you can see here, fear, courage, and anxiety, and explore them, be it the characters in the film or whether it be how the film produces these things in the viewer, and then the philosophical consequences of these kinds of moods appearing in the viewer, for example. Philosophizing in tongues, which is about the role of philosophy to different so-called natural languages, things like English, French, and German, and the impact, for example, of the fact that English nowadays is spoken by approximately 2 billion people on planet Earth, and what will happen to other languages as they go extinct, because I've been talking about extinction, and that applies not only to non-human animals, but also other living languages. And what are the consequences of that? What are the consequences of, for example, everyone perhaps speaking English in the very near future? Philosophy and art now, which again, you can see the aesthetics interest, which looks at philosophy and contemporary art and issues which arise from contemporary art. Then finally, we have some modules which are about specific thinkers, such as Nietzsche, for example, whose photograph you saw a bit earlier, a famous German philosopher who looked at questions of say, nihilism. And we have other one-author modules as well, say Wittgenstein, which, by the way, is normally regarded as an analytic philosophy, which shows you that in your degree you can do some analytic philosophy in the degree, even though it'll be more focused on so-called continental philosophy. So I'm getting to the end now. So I'm just going to briefly mention that we have also a very vibrant visiting speaker program. So people from far and abroad come and visit us. Now, pre-COVID, of course, they would come physically to the campus. During COVID, there'll be more digital talks, but it still allows you to talk to them, right? And we have some very, very influential figures come, such as, for example, Zizek, who came in 2018, and he's one of the few philosophers who, if you go on YouTube, would have views of over 1 million, right? It's very, very rare for professional philosophers nowadays to have YouTube views of over 1 million. So check him out. His talk at Dundee is also available on YouTube. You can just type in his name, Z-I-Z-E-K, and Dundee, and it will appear through the power of YouTube. If you want to find out more, obviously you can search, just type in Dundee and philosophy, and you'll find our website, and that will contain more information. You can contact me. You don't have to remember my name because I know it's difficult. You can simply type in Dundee philosophy, and it'll bring you to our website, and you'll see pictures of the staff, and you'll see my face with a big beard, and you click on my profile, and it'll tell you my email address. You don't have to remember this, and you can email me a question if you don't have a question right now. As part of the university, I've also sent an onus to present you some facts about the university, which the university wants me to present to you, such as the Guardian rankings, and such as that we are first for graduate prospects, according to the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guide 2021. But this stuff, I think, is just more at the abstract university level. So I think probably what you're more interested in is the philosophy stuff and philosophy at Dundee specifically. But in good consciousness, I present the information the university wants me to present to you. So at this stage, I'm going to check if there are basically any questions, either to myself or to the two student ambassadors or representatives, and we'll see if we can answer any questions. So do we have any questions?
Hi there, Oisin. It's Dominic here in the background. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can.
Great stuff. There's one really great question that's come in. It's for Jack or Eve, but potentially both of them could answer it. And it's how would you describe the workload in philosophy at Dundee, Eve and/or Jack?
I don't mind answering first, and then we can both have a shot at it, I think.
Yeah, that's fine, beautiful.
Should I put you on camera?
Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
What was that?
So I'll just say I'm going to put you on camera if that's okay. While you.
Oh right, am I not on yet?
No. You could be heard, but I didn't have the camera on. But now you do. Floor's yours.
Am I good? Okay. Yeah. So I've only really got experience of it in third year because that was the first year that I was like fully only studying philosophy. But generally the kind of pattern that I've noticed is there's kind of two essays, or you can, as Oisin was saying earlier, for one of my modules last year, you could have chosen to do like an art project as well, but I chose not to because I'm not artistic. So generally it's 2 essays per module. So if you're doing say like 2 or 3 philosophy modules or 2 philosophy modules, it would be around 4 essays. Normally the first one that happens is a little bit like shorter or kind of worth less of a percentage of your grade, and then the second one is generally worth more. But to kind of answer your question, I think you're probably, it's manageable. I think I'm not going to lie and say it's not hard work, but it's not impossible at the same time. Like it's hard work, but it's a manageable workload, I think. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Putting Jack now on. I don't know if you wanted to respond. You looked like you did because you put your camera on.
Yeah, I think can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Just to, I think Eve got most of that, but I think another is because there's no exams within philosophy. You're able to work at your own pace, either within the library or at your own home. So there's not the pressure of exams at the end of the year. You're able to kind of and you're fit it around your everyday life. So you're able to move in and out of working on an essay, planning it, structuring it, going back to your readings in order to gather more information or so on. So it's whilst there is a workload to it, and if you've got a number of modules going at the same time, then simultaneously, then you're having to navigate that. But precisely because of its freed nature. You're able to take it at your own pace to a certain extent. Obviously, you've got to put the work in, but it's less pressure, I think, in terms of having to sit and memorize and get ready for a 2-hour exam, say, and then worrying about having to regurgitate that out in a 2-hour exam. And I think that it makes it actually, to some extent, enjoyable. I think it allows the assessments to become actually quite enjoyable to like take part in. I think so. I think whilst the workload is quite tough and you have to put the work in, I think it outweighs having a bunch of exams at the end. So it's quite enjoyable once you get into it. Yeah.
I think that's a very fair comment, Jack. And just to say another tiny thing about workload as well is that it increases over time. So in first and second year, most of your assignments are 1,000 to 2,000 words. If you don't know what that is, most A4 computer pages are around 500 words. So it'd be say 3 to 4 pages. And that increases to 3,000 to 3,500 in your third and fourth year. So you do go in the shallow end, as it were, in university life, and then things get a little bit deeper, both literally and metaphorically, as you go on, right? Third and fourth year. Right, I just want to thank everyone for the input. Unfortunately, we have another session to prepare for right now. It starts at 6, so I'm going to have to leave it there. But if you've got any more questions, specifically for me, because I won't be able to get Eve or Jack again, but for me, you can always, as I said, find my email address simply by typing in Dundee Philosophy, looking at the star profiles and seeing my face and getting my email address that way. I'm really happy to answer any other questions. But for now, we're going to leave it there for today. Hope that's been enjoyable, and I'll thank everyone for their time. Bye bye for now.